2,000 years ago, before the sun had touched the hills of Rome, an old man opened his eyes in a cold tent on the frozen edge of the empire. His body ached. His enemies were closer than his friends. His own son had betrayed his trust. And yet, before his feet touched the ground, he did something almost no one does today. He prepared his mind for war, not with a sword, but with a thought. His name was Marcus Aurelius, and the words he wrote to himself that morning would outlive his empire by 2,000 years. This video is not about waking up early. It's about waking up armed. Stay until the end, because discipline number 7 is the one that changed everything for me. And it might just be the one thing standing between you and the unshakable mind you've been chasing your entire life. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the place where ancient philosophy meets modern struggle. Every week we take the timeless words of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca and turn them into weapons you can use today. Not theory, not decoration for your bookshelf, tools for the mind. If you're new here, consider subscribing, because what you're about to hear isn't just information, it's a discipline. And disciplines only work if you come back to them. Here is an uncomfortable truth. Most people lose the day before they even leave the bed. They reach for the phone before they've had a single unclaimed thought. They let the first voice they hear be a stranger's opinion. A notification, a headline designed to provoke. By the time their feet hit the floor, their mind already belongs to someone else. The Stoics understood something that neuroscience is only now catching up to. That the first hour of your day sets the operating system for everything that follows. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man on earth, still took time each morning to talk to himself before the world could talk at him. Epictetus, born a slave, used his mornings to train the one thing no master could ever chain, his mind. Seneca, surrounded by the corruption of Nero's court, protected his mornings like a soldier protects a border. None of these men had easy lives. None of them had the luxury of naive optimism. What they had was a system, a set of disciplines they returned to, morning after morning, that built something inside them no external force could break. Today we're going to walk through 10 of those disciplines, not as abstract philosophy, but as a practical morning architecture you can start using tomorrow. Some will comfort you. Some will challenge you. One in particular will probably make you uncomfortable, and that discomfort is exactly the point. Let's begin. Discipline 1. Wake before you are called. There's a story about a young officer named Dio, stationed in a Roman garrison town, who prided himself on being the last one out of bed and the first one to complain about the day. He blamed the weather for his mood, the noise for his distraction, his commander for his exhaustion. One winter, an older centurion pulled him aside and said something. Dio never forgot. You do not lose the battle at noon. You lose it in the moment you let the bed decide who's in charge. Marcus Aurelius wrote himself nearly the same lecture, almost word for word, in the opening pages of his private journal. He wrote about lying under warm blankets, telling himself just a little more comfort, a little more rest, and then catching himself in the act of self-betrayal. He reminded himself that he was born to move, to work, to do the things he was made for, and that clinging to warmth was choosing comfort over purpose before the day had even started. This is not a productivity hack about 5 a.m. wake-up clubs. It's deeper than that. The discipline is about authorship. Every morning there is a brief window where you decide whether you are the one directing your life, or whether comfort, inertia, and impulse are going to direct it for you. Hit snooze once and it feels harmless. But you are training a pattern where the easier voice always wins. The Stoic wakes not because mornings are magical, but because the first decision of the day is a rehearsal for every decision after it. If you can override the pull of comfort at 6 a.m., you have already proven to yourself that you can override it at noon, when temptation, laziness, or fear show up wearing a different face. Try this tomorrow, the instant you're conscious, before checking the time, before reaching for your phone. Say to yourself, silently or aloud, I am the one who decides how this begins. It sounds simple. It is not easy. But that one sentence, repeated daily, becomes armor. Quick question for you. What's the very first thing you usually reach for in the morning? Drop it in the comments. I have a feeling a lot of us are going to see an uncomfortable pattern. Discipline 2. Premeditatio malorum. Rehearse the storm. Seneca had a habit that sounds almost pessimistic on the surface, but is one of the most liberating tools in the entire Stoic toolkit. Each morning, before stepping into his day, he would briefly imagine the worst that could plausibly happen. Not to frighten himself, but to disarm fear before it could ambush him. He called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Picture a merchant in ancient Rome, a man named Cassius, whose entire fortune rode on a single shipment crossing the Mediterranean. Every morning he woke in dread, not knowing if his ships had survived the night's storms. A Stoic teacher gave him a strange piece of advice. Each morning, before checking for news of his fleet, sit for 5 minutes and genuinely imagine the ship has sunk. Feel the loss, accept it. Then, and only then, go check. Cassius thought this was madness until he tried it. He discovered that the anticipated grief was almost always heavier than the real news. Whatever it turned out to be, by rehearsing the loss in his mind, he had already survived it. The real day, whatever it brought, felt lighter by comparison. This is not negativity. This is inoculation. The mind that has already considered the worst outcome and found a way to stand steady as a mind that cannot be ambushed. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself each morning that he would meet people that day who were ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, and difficult, not to make himself bitter, but so that when he met them, he wasn't shocked, wasn't offended, wasn't thrown off course. He had already made peace with the weather of human nature before stepping outside. Try this. Spend 2 minutes each morning imagining one plausible difficulty of your day, a hard conversation, a delay, a disappointment. Sit with it. Accept that it might happen. Then release it. You are not summoning bad luck. You are removing its power to surprise you. Discipline 3. The dichotomy of control. Epictetus opened his entire philosophy with one sentence that could fit on a coin, and yet contains enough weight to reorganize an entire life. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. He knew this from brutal experience. Born into slavery, his leg was broken, by most accounts, by his own master in an act of casual cruelty. Epictetus, according to the stories told about him, did not scream, did not beg. He simply observed, almost clinically, that the leg would break if the pressure continued, and it did. What fascinated those around him wasn't his pain, it was his composure. He understood, at a level most free men never reach, that his body could be owned, chained, injured, but his judgment about it could not. Imagine starting your morning with a simple sorting exercise. Take everything weighing on your mind, an approaching deadline, a family member's opinion of you, a diagnosis, a rejection you're waiting to hear back on, and mentally place each item into one of 2 boxes. Box 1, things within your control, your effort, your attitude, your integrity, your response. Box 2, everything else, other people's opinions, the economy, the weather, the outcome of an audition, the verdict of a stranger. The Stoics weren't claiming that the second box doesn't matter. They were making a sharper, more useful claim. Your peace should never depend on what's inside it. There was a young actress named Livia, a name given to her in one of Epictetus's own teaching examples, who trembled before every performance, terrified of the audience's judgment. Her teacher told her something radical. You cannot control whether they clap. You can only control whether you performed with everything you had. The clapping belongs to them. The performance belongs to you. Once she separated the two, her fear didn't disappear, but it stopped ruling her. Every morning, before you check your messages, before the world hands you its verdict on your day, ask yourself what here is actually mine to control. Put your energy only there. Everything else, let it pass through your hands like water. This single mental sorting habit, practiced daily, is perhaps the single most powerful anxiety reduction tool the ancient world ever produced. And it costs nothing. If this idea is landing for you, take 30 seconds right now and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear this. And trust me, we're only 3 disciplines in. Discipline 4. Speak to yourself before the world speaks to you. There's a reason Marcus Aurelius's private notebook, the one we now call Meditations, begins so many entries as if he's mid-conversation with himself. Because he was, every morning before council meetings, before battle reports, before the endless demands of running an empire, the most powerful man alive sat down and had a private argument with his own mind. He reminded himself who he wanted to be that day: patient, fair, undistracted by flattery or insult, because he knew, with total clarity, that if he didn't define himself first, the day would define him instead. A courtier would flatter him and he'd risk vanity. An enemy would provoke him and he'd risk rage. A crisis would frighten him and he'd risk panic, unless he had already decided in the quiet of morning who he was going to be. Contrast this with how most of us actually start the day. We open our phones and the first voices we hear are not our own. They are advertisers, strangers, algorithms optimized to provoke a reaction. We let outrage, comparison, and anxiety cast the first vote on our mood, before we've had a single thought that belonged to us. There's an old story, likely more parable than history, of a young Stoic student named Nicholas who complained to his teacher that his days always went badly. The teacher asked him a simple question: "Whose voice do you hear first each morning, yours or everyone else's?" Nicholas admitted it was never his own. The teacher told him, "Then it is not surprising that you live a life written by other people." The discipline here is simple to describe and hard to practice. Before you consume a single input from the outside world, generate one from the inside. It can be a single sentence. Today I will not be provoked easily. Today I will do my work well, regardless of who notices. Today I choose patience before I choose reaction. Write it if it helps. Say it if it helps. But claim the first voice of your day as your own, because whoever speaks first in your mind tends to set the tone for everyone who speaks after. Discipline 5. View from above. One of the most striking mental exercises Marcus Aurelius returned to again and again was something scholars now call the view from above. He would imagine rising, mentally, above his own life, above Rome, above the empire, above the entire spinning earth, until his palace, his enemies, his aching joints, and his mountain of unread reports shrank into specks on a small blue stone floating in darkness. From that height, the insult from a senator that morning seemed almost comic in its smallness. The argument with a friend, the delayed correspondence, the political maneuvering he'd have to face by noon, all of it, seen from that impossible altitude, lost its grip on his chest. This wasn't escapism. Marcus wasn't trying to pretend his problems didn't exist. He was recalibrating scale. Human beings are terrible at judging the actual size of our problems while we're standing inside them. Our conflict with a coworker feels enormous at 8 a.m. and forgettable a decade later. But we rarely borrow that decade's perspective in the moment we need it most. Picture a woman named Helena, a wealthy widow mentioned in the letters of Stoic teachers of the era, consumed with anxiety over a social slight. A friend who hadn't invited her to a gathering. She spun in circles over it for days. A philosopher she consulted told her to imagine, just for a moment, the whole of Rome from the height of a hawk in flight, every house the same size, every argument the same size, every grudge equally invisible from that height. Slowly, she said, the sting of the slight began to shrink to its true size. Nothing. Try this in the mornings, especially on days that feel heavy before they've even begun. Close your eyes. Picture your home from above, then your street, your city, your country, the curve of the earth itself, hanging in silent black space. Then imagine zooming back down, through the clouds, to your street, to your room, to yourself, carrying that scale with you. Whatever is waiting for you today, you now know its true size. Most of it is smaller than it feels. Discipline 6. Do the hard thing first. Seneca had little patience for people who arranged their lives around comfort. He wrote to his friend Lucilius about the fact that most men fear labor not because it is truly difficult, but because they've trained themselves day after day to avoid it. And the avoidance itself is what turns simple effort into something they dread. There's a well-known Stoic teaching, principle sometimes illustrated through the figure of a young soldier named Titus, freshly enlisted, who dreaded the brutal morning drills, running in armor before dawn, up steep hillsides, under the barked orders of a centurion who seemed to enjoy his suffering. Titus complained to an older soldier that he hated mornings, hated the drills, hated the exhaustion before the sun had even risen. The older soldier gave him an answer that has echoed through military and Stoic tradition alike. The hill doesn't get smaller because you complain about it, but you get stronger because you climbed it anyway. The discipline of doing the hard thing first is deceptively simple. Most of us structure our mornings around ease, check messages, scroll a little, ease into the day, and save the difficult task, the hard conversation, the demanding project, for later, which quietly becomes never or under stress, at the last possible moment. The Stoics inverted this completely. They treated difficulty as a kind of training equipment for the will, something to be sought early, deliberately, while your discipline is freshest and your excuses haven't yet had time to multiply. Every hard thing avoided in the morning doesn't disappear. It waits for you, usually at the worst possible hour, now heavier with the added weight of dread. Ask yourself, tomorrow morning, what is the one task I am most tempted to postpone today? Do that first. Not because suffering is virtuous for its own sake, but because a mind that has already conquered its hardest task by 9 a.m. moves through the rest of the day with a quiet, earned confidence that no amount of comfort could ever produce. Curious how many of you already do this, instinctively. Comment below with the one task you always try to knock out first. I read every single one, and I want to see how many hard thing first people are watching this right now. Discipline 7. Negative visualization of what you already have. Here is the discipline that, if I'm honest with you, rearranged something inside me the first time I truly understood it. We spend our mornings, most of us, silently cataloging what we lack. The body that isn't fit enough. The bank account that isn't full enough. The relationship that isn't perfect enough. We wake already in a posture of deficiency, measuring the gap between where we are and where we imagine we should be. The Stoics practiced something almost the exact opposite, and it is far stranger and far more powerful than ordinary gratitude journaling. Each morning they would briefly imagine the loss of what they already had, not to become anxious, but to restore its value. Picture your own hands capable of movement, and imagine, just for a moment, that you had woken up without them. Picture the people you love, and imagine briefly a morning without their voices in the world. Picture your own breath, and imagine it taken. This is uncomfortable by design. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself more than once that everything he had, his position, his family, his very body, was on loan from a universe that owed him nothing and could reclaim it at any moment. Without apology, without warning, rather than filling him with dread, this thought filled him with a fierce, clear-eyed appreciation for what was, in that exact moment, still his. There's a story, likely apocryphal but instructive, of a wealthy Roman named Fabius, who had grown numb to his own fortune, his health, his family, his estate, until he watched a childhood friend lose everything in a single fire. Fabius returned home that night and, for the first time in years, actually saw his own sleeping children, his own working legs, his own breathing chest, as if seeing them for the first time. He later told his teacher that the fire had taken his friend's house and somehow given him back his own life. You do not need a tragedy to access this clarity. You only need 5 minutes each morning, and the willingness to sit with an uncomfortable thought on purpose. Picture, briefly and specifically, losing something or someone you have stopped noticing. Then open your eyes to the fact that today you have not lost it. That gap between imagined loss and present reality is where gratitude stops being a platitude and becomes something closer to reverence. This discipline alone, practiced consistently, has been shown across modern psychological research to meaningfully shift baseline mood and reduce the numbing effect we call hedonic adaptation. The Stoics discovered it 2,000 years before anyone put it in a peer-reviewed journal. Discipline 8. Prepare for the ingratitude of others. This one stings a little, but Marcus Aurelius insisted on it every single morning. And I think that insistence is exactly why he remained so steady in a world full of betrayal. He reminded himself before leaving his tent that he would encounter people that day who were selfish, ungrateful, dishonest, jealous, or unkind, and he told himself plainly that this was not a flaw in the universe, but simply what happens when you live among human beings. Some, he wrote, don't even understand right from wrong. Others act badly out of ignorance rather than malice. None of it, he decided in advance, would be allowed to disturb his own conduct, because their failures belonged to them, not to him. This is not cynicism. It's armor against a very specific kind of wound, the wound of expecting fairness from a world that never promised it. Consider a young administrator, referenced in Stoic teaching examples, who worked tirelessly for a superior who took credit for every success and blamed his staff for every failure. He came to his teacher furious, ready to quit, consumed by the injustice of it. His teacher didn't tell him the injustice wasn't real. He told him something harder. You are shocked because you expected gratitude. Expect nothing, and you will never again be ambushed by its absence. Do good work because it is who you are, not because you expect applause for it. This is perhaps one of the most freeing disciplines on this list, because so much of our daily suffering doesn't come from what happens to us. It comes from the gap between what we expected and what actually occurred. Prepare each morning for a small amount of unfairness, a small amount of thanklessness, a small amount of human disappointment, not to become bitter, but so that when it inevitably arrives, you are not derailed by shock. You simply nod, recognize it for what it is, and continue doing what is right, regardless of whether anyone notices. Discipline. 9. Set an intention, not just a task list. Most people wake up and immediately think in terms of tasks, emails to answer, meetings to attend, errands to run. The Stoics thought in terms of something deeper, character. Before Marcus Aurelius listed what he had to do that day, he decided who he intended to be while doing it. There's a subtle but massive difference between today I need to have a difficult conversation with my business partner and today I intend to be honest and calm, even during a difficult conversation. The first is a task. The second is a discipline of character that will shape not just that one conversation, but every interaction layered on top of it. Epictetus taught his students to treat each day like an athlete treats a match. Not simply showing up, but showing up with a defined intention for how they would compete, regardless of the score. A wrestler doesn't just intend to wrestle, he intends to wrestle with technique, with patience, without losing his temper when thrown to the ground. The score is not fully in his control. His conduct is. Picture a merchant named Rufus, mentioned in early Stoic teaching dialogues, who ran a stall in the forum and dreaded difficult customers. His mentor told him to stop setting the goal, sell well, today, and instead set the goal, be patient and fair today, regardless of how customers behave. On the days he focused on the sale, a single rude customer could ruin his mood for hours. On the days he focused on his own conduct, even a terrible customer became irrelevant to his sense of the day, because he had already succeeded at the only goal that mattered, the moment he responded with patience. Try this tomorrow. Before you write your task list, write one sentence describing the kind of person you intend to be while completing it. Patient, honest, undistracted, brave. Let That sentence sit above your to-do list like a banner. Tasks can be interrupted, delayed or ruined by circumstance. Character, chosen